நம்மளுடைய அடுத்த அமர்வு வந்து குழந்தைகள் இலக்கியம் குறித்த உரையாடல். பொதுவாக இந்திய சூழ்நிலையில வந்து குழந்தைகள் இலக்கியம் அப்படின்றதே கிட்டத்தட்ட இல்லாத நிலைமையில தான் இருக்கு. அப்படி இருக்கிற இலக்கியங்களுமே வந்து பெரியவர்கள் குழந்தைங்க எப்படி நடந்துக்கணும்னு நினைக்கிறாங்களோ அதை சொல்ற இலக்கியங்களா தான் இருக்கு. நான் உதாரணமா 2 விஷயம் சொல்லணும்னு நினைக்கிறேன். ஒன்று, நான் ஸ்கூல் படிக்கும் போதெல்லாம் வந்த இலக்கியங்கள் எல்லாம், குழந்தைகளுக்கான புத்தகங்கள் எல்லாம் வந்து ரொம்ப ஸ்டீரியோடிபிக்கலான கதாபாத்திரங்கள் இருக்கும். என்னன்னா 2 பேர் இருப்பாங்க, ஒருத்தர் நல்லவர் ஒருத்தர் கெட்டவரா இருப்பாங்க. இந்த நல்லவர் வந்து கெட்டவரை திருத்துவாருன்ற மாதிரியான இதுதான் இருக்கும். அதுக்காக அவங்க பயன்படுத்துற பெயர்கள்ல இருந்து எல்லாமே ஸ்டீரியோடிபிக்கலா இருக்கும். லைக் ராம் ரஹீம் அப்படின்ற 2 நேம் அவங்க யூஸ் பண்ணுவாங்க. ராம் நல்லவரா இருப்பார், ரஹீம் கெட்டவரா இருப்பார், அவங்க திருத்துவாங்கன்ற மாதிரியான ஒரு சூழ்நிலையில தான் அந்த புத்தகங்கள் எல்லாம் எழுதப்படும். ஸோ சின்ன வயசுல இருந்தே குழந்தைக்கு வந்து யார் நல்லவங்க, எப்படிப்பட்டவங்க நல்லவங்க, யார் கெட்டவங்கன்ற ஒரு மாதிரியான ஒரு இதை தான் புகுத்திக்கிட்டு இருக்காங்க. ஸோ இந்த சூழ்நிலையில குழந்தைகளோட இலக்கியத்துல வந்துட்டு ஜெண்டர் பத்தியோ செக்ஷுவாலிட்டி பத்தியோ குழந்தைகளுக்கு ஏற்ற வகையில பேசுறது எந்த அளவுக்கு இருக்கும் அப்படின்றது வந்து தெரியல. ஸோ இது பத்தின உரையாடல் தான் அடுத்தது நடக்க போகுது. இந்த உரையாடலுக்கான பேச்சாளர்களை மருத்துவர் ஷில்பா அறிமுகம் செய்வார்.
ஹலோ, குட் மார்னிங் அண்ட் வெல்கம். இந்த பேனல் வந்து இன்க்ளூசிவ் சில்ட்ரன்ஸ் லிட்ரேச்சர், அதாவது அனைவருக்குமான சிறார் இலக்கியம். நம்ம இந்த உலகத்தை பற்றி நம்ம தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கும் நம்மளை பற்றி நம்ம தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்குமே வந்து ரொம்ப ரொம்ப முக்கியமான பங்கு வந்து புத்தகங்களுக்கு இருக்குது. நம்ம சின்ன வயசுலேருந்து எந்த துணுக்காமலாக இருக்கட்டும், பேப்பராக இருக்கட்டும், ஏதோ ஒன்று எழுத்துக்கு மிகப்பெரிய பங்கு இருக்குது. இதில் இப்போதைக்கு ஓரளவு டைவர்சிட்டி இருக்க மாதிரி பெரியவங்களுக்கான இலக்கியம் இருக்குது. அடல்ட்ஸ் லிட்ரேச்சர் ஹாஸ் லிட்டில் பிட் டைவர்சிட்டி, பட் தென் அந்த மாதிரியான ஒரு உள்ளடக்கிய தன்மை, இன்க்ளூசிவிட்டி, குழந்தைகளுக்கான சிறார்களுக்கான இலக்கியங்களும் வரும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு எதிர்பார்க்குறோம். அதுக்கு மிகப்பெரிய அவசியமும் இருக்குது. இந்த மாதிரியான இலக்கியங்கள் வரும்போது தான் சிறியவங்களுக்கு ஒரு பரந்த ஒரு ப்ராடான வியூ பாயிண்ட் உருவாகும். அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் நம்ம வித்தியாசமானவங்க இயல்பானவங்க இல்லைன்னு சொல்லப்படுற children will be included. It is not only about like looking at from other point of view, but for all the children to be included. இந்த நம்ம இன்க்ளூசிவ் லிட்ரேச்சர்னு பேசுகிற உள்ளடக்கி இலக்கியம் அப்படிங்கிறது வேறுபட்ட நபர்களை பற்றின ஒரு கதையோ அவங்கள பார்த்து அவங்கள பற்றி விவரிக்கிற கதை மாதிரி இல்லாமல், இல்லை அதை அவங்கள பற்றி மற்றவங்களுக்கு சொல்லிக் கொடுக்கறதுக்கு ஒரு மீடியம் கிடையாது. இதுக்கு பதிலாக சுவாரஸ்யமான கதைகள் மூலமாக நம்ம வாழ்க்கையில் தினம் இல்லை வெளியே பார்க்குற ஆளுங்களை பற்றின பேசுகிற ஒரு விஷயமா இருக்கணும். டு reiterate this point, inclusive literature are not stories about people who are different, or they are neither a medium to teach other people about the lives of those who are perceived to be different. They are stories with engaging plot lines which happen to include characters and the people and narratives which are from all walks of life. இந்த அமர்வில் நம்ம பேச போகிறது வந்து நம்ம வாசிக்கிற நம்ம கொண்டாடுற எழுத்துக்களையும் எழுத்தாளர்களையும் வேறு மாதிரியான மனிதர்களை உள்ளடக்கி இந்த உலகத்தை நம்மளுக்கு காமிக்குதா இல்லையா அப்படிங்கிறத பற்றி. நம்மளுக்கு 2 ஸ்பீக்கர்ஸ் வந்து we are like going to talk about inclusive children's literature. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் பேச போகிறவங்க வந்து ஷால்ஸ் மஹாஜன். ஷால்ஸ் மஹாஜன் is a writer, activist and part feline, somewhat human, genderqueer feminist fellow who lives in Bombay, but they mainly live inside their head. They have been a part of Labia, a queer feminist LBT collective for the past 2 decades, and they have published works that are called Timmy in Tangles, Timmy and Rizu, A Big Day for Little Wheels, and No Outlaws in the Gender Galaxy. இப்போ ஒரு 20 நிமிட பேச்சு அவங்களுக்கு இருக்குது. அவங்க பேசி முடிச்சதுக்கப்புறமா there will be like a 5 to 10 minutes question and answer session. உங்களோட கேள்விகளை நீங்கள் கேட்கலாம். But then please be concise and polite and be relevant in your questions to them. கிரீஷ் முன்னாடி சொன்னது தான், the way that we think somebody presents and the way that they are might be entirely different. Please don't யாரையும் ஸ்டீரியோடைப் பண்ணாதீங்க, masculine, feminine, he, she அப்படின்ட்டு. If you have a doubt, ask them, or else better just like drop using like sir, ma'am அந்த மாதிரி gendered expressions விட்டுட்டு I think we should like move on to the next step. We can respect someone without using those words called for respect. With this I'd like to welcome Shals Mahajan on stage, please.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. That was lovely. Though I have to admit that I didn't get a bit, but then I quickly asked Mauli and he did the translation for me. Thanks. So thank you. Wow, and the hall has gotten really full in this time. Thank you all for being here, but thank you really Queer Chronicles and Mauli especially for inviting me. This is really cool. And when Mauli said that this is about, we'd like you to talk about inclusive children's literature, I was really delighted. And however, you know, I have to admit that when I'm standing here, I'm also somebody who doesn't speak Tamil. I speak Hindi and English. I grew up a lot in Western India, mainly Rajasthan. And so I'm coming from a very different space. But I'd like to start with, you know, as a child, I think the earlier speaker mentioned, you know, and why Molly said that they wanted to include children's literature, is that I think for a lot of us, queer people, but also people who don't sort of fit, literature becomes, and books become the space that give us something to hold on to when the world does not. And so whenever I look and think about my own childhood, I mean, I think for me, books and anything, the written word, actually more than anything else, was the space of both refuge, of imagination, and also of just finding things and people who were closer to what I felt like than anything else. And I think this twin sort of role that books and literature especially plays, especially when we are growing up, you know, it opens out different worlds than the world that we are living into us. It gives us the possibilities of different worlds and different realities which are possible, which are unlike our own, and opens up those worlds to us, especially for those of us who do not fit very well in, who find ourselves at odds with our peers, who are not very comfortable being, and especially this goes for individuals, but I think also as communities. When we find somebody like us or somebody we can relate to in literature, then that sort of also opens up a space for us. So in terms of representation also, it's not just about imagination and inviting to other worlds. It's also literature, when we are growing up, is also important in terms of finding somebody who feels as alienated perhaps and as different than us. And I think that those two things are really crucial. Especially, I mean, when it comes to representation, of course, you know, as the early speaker said also, and it's very clear that representation in literature also depends on a lot of what books you're reading, what access you have, and what books are being published in our schools. Say, for example, in Rajasthan, the school books were not just very normative, they were also, you know, very clear about social structures. There's very little of progressive thought in a lot of ways. So, for example, I would imagine the textbooks in Tamil Nadu look different. And so what are the things we are reading here are different. And so that sort of the amount of pressure progressive politics is able to push on the mainstream also sort of shifts what we are able to read and know. But when it comes to stories and writing, again, the languages we are reading in and what we have access to makes that difference. So in some places we have access to not, you know, you would have a lot more conversation about, say, different kinds of lives than urban lives. But maybe for some people, the books that are available, for example, if I look at Bombay schools and when I talk to children there, they're reading books in English which are very focused on urban, very middle class, upper class lives of, you know, upper caste lives. And so there is a whole representation of that. And I think somewhere that when I think of children's literature, and this is the point that I'm coming to, is that I feel that there is a process, and this is not just literature, but when we come to children, there is, as adults, this whole thing about trying to make children understand the world and make them into people we want them to become. And this is part of families, this is part of schools, and this also somewhere becomes the part of children's literature. And this is what actually, and a lot of it is in terms of, is bound in nurturing and teaching children, and the other is around protection. So the other trope of with children is around protection, that we protect them from difficult realities, not realizing that as children most of us face a lot of violence, witness to a lot of violence. We see that around us. It is, you know, adults are not able to in real life protect us from violence. We face violence as our families face violence, our families face deprivation, our families face a lot of social and political violence, but at the same time, or communities do, as well as individuals, we see that within our families as well. But when you look at children's writing for children and teaching, there is almost a thing about teaching children to be good citizens of a particular kind, to belong to this nation with a particular ideology, so that all the adult sort of way in which the world is structured, all those structures are passed on as norms and rights correct for children. So they have to behave like that. At the same time, we do not want to, so that's around teaching them the right thing, and we don't want children to look at difficult, what we see as, so there's a lot of protection around children. And in the name of protection, there is a normativization. And that, I feel, is one of the biggest problems. And the representation in this normativization becomes of a very particular kind. And you don't see different people there, you don't see different thoughts. So for example, even in terms of how do you understand reality? I think one of the big focuses in children is you want children to distinguish between what is real and what is imaginary, thereby immediately curbing a lot of, what enables us as children to learn about the world is our leaps of imagination. Because there is very little one knows, but one has a huge capacity to learn, and one is learning through imagination. At the same time, there is this huge focus in the name of understanding how the world is and to be protected in it. There is a curbing of imagination. And so very clearly this, so in some sense what it also does is teach you a particular way of thinking about reality. And that does not take care, then for a lot of us, who may not be as, normative in our psychosocial abilities, for example. If I look at the world differently, if the world that I live in my imagination is as real to me as this world that I inhabit materially, then there is, instead of creating a sense that this world and this world can exist together, I am continuously forced to understand that this is the real world, I should focus on this world and give up on the other worlds that may exist in my head. And so there is different kinds of normal that we are being taught. Clearly when it comes to gender and sexuality and everything, I think all of us have grown up with it. There's very little visible conversation about any of us who don't feel very comfortable being the boys and girls we're supposed to be. And this is something all of us learn very quickly in life. As you know, I've been part of queer groups, and we've done lots of research around it also. And you see it, especially with people who are growing up as young boys. The violence starts very early. At age 4 and 5, the bullying, and it's not just schools, it's not just teachers, it's home, it's also people around, but it's also your own peers. So you're learning about masculinity and femininity very, very early on. You're also learning very normative things about how to behave. So your thing of self-censorship also increases a lot. And what we don't have in literature is in books, especially in children's writing, where different people just exist together with each other. We see similar kinds of families. We may see, again I said, depending on what location we are on, we may read about different families from different locations of urban or rural or caste and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we see very few differently structured intimacies. We see very few people who do not seem to fit into how everybody should be. And those sort of add up to us. And somewhere I think that this gendered normativity of, which really is something that is very rare. And so what it does is it takes away the space that we could have had in our head also of saying, okay, there is at least a character who's somewhere else who's different, who can survive like that. And I think that is the kind of inclusivity that we need at one level. So one level of inclusivity is representation, where in our everyday reading, in the children's books that we read, we read of people who are different. Similarly, if one looks at disability, and I'm talking about a lot of publishers now who are, especially, I mean, some are Chennai based, also in other cities, but a lot of publishers are doing a lot of publication which is including a lot of diversity, and which is important. So you have children's literature and writing where you have a child who has a disability who's on a wheelchair who's the protagonist. You have a child, very recently Tulika published a book where there's a young child who wants to be, who's a girl, who thinks she's a girl, but the world does not treat her like that. And so, you know, when she wants a gift for a festival, she's given clothes that she doesn't want to wear. She wants a frock. And then, you know, so there is, but this is very beginning. And so there is, I think there is more in terms of neurodiversity, there's more in terms of disability, there's more in terms of, so people are trying. But I think representation finally goes only up to a certain level. And which I think I would sort of see that it's a literature of existence, what I call. That, you know, that a lot of books have begun, a lot of spaces have begun to acknowledge that very many different people exist. But I think for those of us who have existed as different, that's not enough for us. Just having a queer character or just having, you know, a story, and a lot of these stories also focus, for example, a lot of young adult novels might focus on then this whole thing, if it's a queer character, of realizing you're queer, this whole thing of coming out. Now, yes, it is important, but it is still not the only thing in our lives. You know, our lives are so much more. And so what does literature look like when it comes from a place, when it becomes a literature not of existence, not to say that we exist, but it comes from us speaking to people like us, where we say that this is our life, this is our experience. What does that literature look like? And that we have very little of. We don't have so much of that. We are beginning to have literature that acknowledges that difference exists, literature that says there could be different people. There's a bit of representation. But that representation only goes to such an extent, and often it becomes a way of talking about marginalized people to this sort of imaginary mainstream. So, you know, you are telling the world, okay, these people also exist. You're telling the abled world that disabled people also exist. You know, you're telling the sort of straight world that queer people exist. You're telling a cis world, trans people exist. And this is a problem with a lot of writing. I mean, adult writing, of course. I mean, you know, we know that. But this is not the writing. This is not the representation that really works. Just to establish that there are different kind of people is not enough. What we need is a literature which actually speaks like how we do to each other. And when I'm saying we do to each other, I'm talking of different marginalizations and different locations when people speak to each other. How does that look like? Because finally, as I said earlier, literature is about opening out the world. And so all of us have learned about things completely unknown to us from books. I mean, when I was, young, there were a lot of Russian literature and books available very inexpensively. These were the cheapest books to buy. And so I was happily reading about that without any idea of, you know, what this whole country was about, what the revolution was about. But it just sort of created a space. So similarly, I think that it is not, I think often it is that, no, we have to mainstreamize these voices so that other people understand. But the whole point of literature is that we understand different realities from reading. So why should I or anybody sort of tailor my reality so that others may see me and read me in a particular way? I actually want to talk about how we live so that, you know, that reality is respected as well, and that opens up worlds for other people to look into different locations and say, okay, you know, this is what it is. And I think, so therefore, I think even in literature, that's just thinking in this talk that what would that literature look like? And I thought maybe I'll talk about 2-3 books which I really like. And a few days ago I was talking to some students about queer storytelling, and I was telling them that what I'm finding is in a lot of young adult literature actually a very fantastic opening up of the world. So when I see that, what I'm talking about, the literature of experience, I see it some in fiction for adults, but I also see a lot of it happening in young adult fiction. So I thought I'd talk about 4 books very quickly, and to talk about what is the kind of thing I'm talking about. A few from India and one from the US. So the first book I want to talk about is a Tulika book, which is by Rinchin. I don't know if many of you have looked at it. It's called I Will Save My Land. Now this is a beautiful book about this young girl who's growing up in a village, in a community where the land is going to be taken up by a large corporate for mining. And so this girl is living in that environment. The community is fighting against the larger corporate, and the village with other villages together are trying to fight. And it's a small book for children, young children. It's a picture book. So it's not, like it doesn't have that much space to talk about this whole story, but very beautifully it does this. And this girl is fighting within her family to say that I work on my land, I want my own piece of land. So what the writer does is also bring in that the fight that her grandmother had with the family she married into owning land, because they said that women from your caste don't own land, and she said no, I will own my land. So this kid has a sort of person in her grandmother, and her grandmother says, okay, this is your piece of land, you till it and you take care of it. And so what happens is at some point the kids also understanding that the whole community is fighting against this, and so there is a fear of her land being taken away. So what happens is, and happens in a lot of children's books, is the kid runs away. Right? So this is a trope you're familiar with from many books. So everybody's searching, where is this little girl, where has she gone off? Her name is Mati. And so when they look for her, finally they find her sleeping on her little piece of land which she's been tilling and taking care of, because she's trying to save that land. So I feel that this is a book which does many beautiful things at multiple levels. Here is a young person who's understanding and being part of a larger community struggle against something which is wanting to take over. She's interpreting it that in her own way, but here's also a child who has agency of a very different kind in this book, where she's fighting for her own land, also from her family, saying that this is my land, and if it is mine, I am going to do something to save it. So, and it's not a very dramatic book, it's a very simply written book, but I think what it does in terms of inclusivity, what it does in terms of looking at children as people who can act, who can think, respecting that, I think that is a very rare thing to find in children's literature. That this kind of looking at children. The second book I'd like to talk about is my own book, which is called Timmy Entangles. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because it is again written for about children around. I mean, see, when I say written for about, these are also publishing industry terms, which I have learned. So, they say this is around age 6 to 8, 9 and so on and so forth. For me, I read books meant for age 2 to 4 to, whatever. So, I think many of us do. But, so in this book, you have a child who is very involved and spends a lot of time with these friends whom she has, but whom other people don't really see and are aware of. And and she lives with her mother and this woman who's very much part of their household, who takes care of the house. And in Bombay they are called Maushi. So there's this Kamal Maushi and mother she lives with. And so there is a conflict between the mother who wants her to go to school and this kid who says that I don't want to go to school because I'm a Raja, I don't want to do. And so, she's in that place. And the thing is, which I find that, there are many ways of dealing with the situation, but very little do we see a space of equality and respect where the adult and the child sit at a table with two conflicting realities and say, let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. Instead of, very often adults shouting at children, you just have to go to school, you just have to do this. Rather than that, what would it mean for a world where this child's reality is taken seriously? Or said, okay, I don't have to understand it, but this is real for you, and what does it mean to do that? And so I think those are the also books that sort of create that space, and some writers are trying to do that, to look at children again in this adult world as complete beings who have a clear grasp on reality and are working through that. And so to actually not enforce a worldview, but try to see how a conversation would lead to, which we keep on saying for adults all the time, let's talk about it. But let's do that conversation with children and adults as well. Another book which has come out recently is called A Cloud Called Bhura, and this is by Bijal Rajani, and it's about actually the environment. It's again for young teenagers, 12, 13, 14, around that age. The protagonists are that age. What I find fascinating, there are many things fascinating about the book, but I will just come to one part of it. It's urban based, it's Bombay based. There's a huge cloud that envelops Bombay, and there is a huge environmental crisis, and so there are these 4 friends who are being affected, their families, but also it looks at what the politicians are doing, what the media is doing, and so on and so forth. And at some point things become really bad, and these children start feeling, and especially one of them is affected really badly, and so they start feeling we have to do something. And how they go about it again is very fascinating, because in a lot of fantasy literature you have a lot of very drastic action, but this is in realism. But you see that this child comes from an Ambedkarite family, and how they are learning, the kids learn how to organize from the Ambedkarite grandparents. And so you see this lovely sort of way of, and learning that change will not come easily, but we can organize. And then the children do the organizing. So the grandparents are not leading them, but they gently sort of this conversation about how protests can be done, how struggles can be done. So that works in that. And the final book I want to talk about is a young adult novel by Claire Kahn. It's based in the US. It's called Let's Talk About Love. And when I think of queer literature, I think this is some of the literature that we are looking for. So the protagonist is a young black woman. She's in her second year of college, undergraduate college, so somewhere around 18, 19 years of age. So she's facing a lot of the things that young people at that time are facing. What do you want to do in life? What do you want to study? She comes from a successful black family of lawyer parents, and who have fought in the civil rights movement, and who sort of have pushed that all their children should get educated and, sort of be powerful and, good, sort of be also good representatives of the community, but also sort of, create that difference that they have fought and come this far, so their children should also sort of go on. A lot of thing familiar from parents. She's also figuring out, she has some 2 close friends who she lives with, but they are in a relationship with each other, and she's trying to figure out whether she wants to be this sort of, they're her closest friends, but is this living arrangement working out? And she is asexual. And so she has been very clear about it. So her asexuality is not the focus of the book. It is all these things happening in this time in her life which are the focus of her book. She is comfortable with her asexuality. She's read upon it, and she is fairly clear what is important to her. But how does it play out in her relationships? Because she is attracted to people, she's attracted to different people, and she wants relationships with them. And how does that play out? And how, so within all of this happening, what happens in this young person's life? That's the book. And I think it's fascinating, because actually when she's talking to her parents, coming out as asexual is not completely not the issue with them. Because when she's talking to them, she wants to be an interior designer. So for her, the big question is, how do I tell my lawyer parents that actually I'm going to not study law? And so the conflict there is that. The conflict with her best friends is, do I want to stay? We are all trying to do different things about living together. We are trying to be 3 friends together, but is this working? And in her relationships, there is a negotiation of what does attraction mean? What does, if I don't feel sexual, what does it mean? But still I want a romantic relationship. How do I talk about it? So there are different ways. And I think this sort of novel creates a space to talk about the complexities of how we live our lives. And so for me, I think these are some of the examples of what inclusive literature, children's literature does look like. And I think that I see that possibility more and more. And so I hope that there is more of it. So I'm going to just end here if, yeah. So thank you.